Lonely rancher knocked and said, "I was told you need a rancher." The widow saw his daughter behind his. The sun had begun to dip low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow across the wide empty fields that surrounded the widow's ranch. The quiet was heavy, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the dry grass or the distant calls of a few birds returning to their nests. Life on the ranch had always been demanding, but since her husband had passed, it felt almost unbearable. Every day was a struggle to keep the animals fed, the fences repaired, and the fields tended. She had learned to be strong, but the loneliness pressed on her like a weight she could not lift. That afternoon, as she worked near the barn, her hands raw and aching from hauling hay, she heard a knock at the front door. It was a sound she had not expected. Visitors were rare in this remote part of the country. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and walked slowly toward the door. When she opened it, she was met with the sight of a man she had never seen before. He looked ordinary at first glance, rugged with dirt-stained jeans and a worn jacket, but there was something about his calm presence that immediately made her curious. "I was told you need a rancher," he said, his voice steady but polite. He did not demand entry or offer long explanations. There was a quiet confidence about him, a sense of honesty that made her pause. He looked at her with kind eyes that seemed to understand her unspoken struggles, and she found herself studying his face, wondering who he was and why he had come. I manage the ranch just fine," she said cautiously. "Though I could use help sometimes, I'm not sure She hesitated, unsure if she should admit how much the work had begun to wear her down. The man nodded slightly, understanding more in her pause than she had said aloud. "I don't mean to intrude," he said gently. "I just heard that you might need a hand with the ranch. I'm a rancher myself. I've worked these lands for years, and I know how hard it can be to keep everything running alone." She studied him in silence, torn between suspicion and relief. The truth was, she had been struggling more than she would admit, and the idea of help was tempting. Still, she could not ignore the caution that had always kept her safe. She glanced past him toward the barn and the fields and hesitated. Finally, she said, "Well, I suppose you can look around. There's always work to be done." A small smile flickered across his face, but it was brief, and he immediately set to work, as if he had been helping on ranches all his life. He began checking the fences first, moving efficiently from one post to another, fixing what had begun to sag. She watched quietly, impressed by the speed and precision of his work. He moved with a confidence that spoke of experience, but without arrogance. It was clear he knew what he was doing, and yet he did not try to take over. He simply offered his skill where it was needed. As he worked, she noticed something she had not seen before. Behind him, a small figure was peeking out from behind the barn, a little girl with wide, curious eyes. She was clearly the rancher's daughter, shyly watching everything her father did. The widow's heart softened at the sight. There was something tender in the way the child clung to her father's side, yet she also observed the widow with a mix of curiosity and caution. The widow cleared her throat, and the little girl ducked behind her father immediately, as if she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. The rancher gave the child a reassuring look, but did not interrupt his work. There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond formed through years of shared routines and trust. The widow felt a strange sense of warmth seeing the care between them, and she realized this small family had been through challenges of its own. By the end of the afternoon, most of the chores she had struggled with were completed. The fences were repaired, the animals were fed, and the barn was tidied. She felt a sense of relief she had not known in months. For the first time in a long while, she could imagine the day ending without exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. As the rancher prepared to leave, she found herself hesitating.
Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't expect anyone to come out here today."
"I've been handling things alone for a long time." He looked at her, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "It's hard to manage a ranch by yourself," he said simply. "But you don't have to do it alone if you don't want to." She nodded, almost embarrassed by the emotion that had crept into her chest. She had been strong for so long, and yet this simple offer of help stirred feelings she had not allowed herself to feel. She watched as he mounted his horse, the little girl climbing on behind him. For a moment, the child looked over her shoulder and gave a shy wave. The widow waved back, a small smile breaking across her face. That evening, as the sun sank below the horizon and the ranch was bathed in twilight, she found herself thinking about the visit. The quiet had returned, but it felt different now. It no longer seemed like an oppressive silence, but a space that could be shared. She wondered about the rancher's life, about his little daughter, and about the courage it must take to face the world as a single parent. She realized that there was more to this man than she had first assumed. His presence had brought a strange sense of hope into her life, a reminder that even in the hardest times, help and kindness could appear unexpectedly. And as she looked toward the barn, she imagined the little girl watching again, curious and quiet, a small connection that had begun without words.
The widow went to bed that night with her mind full of thoughts.
She could not stop thinking about the small family who had entered her life so briefly, yet left a lasting impression. She realized that life on the ranch did not have to be endured in isolation. Perhaps with a little help and a little trust, it could be shared, and even enjoyed again. As she drifted off to sleep, she wondered what tomorrow would bring. Would the rancher return? Would the little girl be there again? She did not know, but for the first time in months she felt a flicker of anticipation. Life, it seemed, had a way of surprising even the loneliest hearts. And somewhere in the quiet night the thought lingered in her mind, maybe this simple knock on her door was the beginning of something new, something she had never expected, but deeply needed. The next morning the widow woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely touched the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. The ranch was quiet, but she felt a strange sense of anticipation. A flutter in her chest she had not felt in a long time. The previous day's visitor lingered in her thoughts, the rancher who had offered help so humbly, and his small, shy daughter who had watched her from behind him. She wasn't sure why, but the memory of their faces brought a warmth she hadn't expected. By mid-morning there was a familiar sound, a soft creak of a gate swinging open. She stepped outside and saw him again, the rancher, moving through the fields with quiet confidence. The little girl was there too, this time a little braver, peeking around his shoulder but not hiding completely. He greeted her politely, tipping his hat with a small smile. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not intruding again." She shook her head, a little amused at her own nervousness. "Not at all," she replied. "It's nice to have help." She didn't finish her sentence, afraid that admitting how lonely and overwhelmed she had felt might make her sound weak. Over the next few hours, they worked together on the ranch. The rancher handled chores with practiced skill, tending to the animals, checking the fences, and repairing a broken gate that had troubled her for weeks. She tried to help where she could, but it became clear that his experience made even the hardest tasks look effortless. She watched him quietly, a mixture of admiration and relief in her gaze. It wasn't just his skill. It was the calm way he moved, the patience he showed, and the quiet authority in his presence that made her feel safe, even in her own space. Meanwhile, the little girl began to explore the ranch cautiously. At first, she stayed behind her father, peeking out from behind his legs and glancing at the widow with wide, curious eyes. The widow found herself smiling, feeling a little awkward but touched by the child's quiet observation. She remembered her own days of youth, watching adults with wonder and wanting to be included but afraid to intrude. "Do you like the animals?" the widow asked gently, crouching a little so she was on the child's level. The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded shyly. She stepped a small distance forward, her hand brushing against the fence as if testing the world around her. The widow noticed how delicate she seemed, yet there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a sense that she had already learned to be cautious, to observe before trusting. The rancher caught the glance between them and smiled softly. "She's curious," he said quietly, as if speaking more to himself than to anyone else. "Just like her mother, she watches first, then joins in when she's sure it's safe." The widow nodded, understanding more than he realized. She thought of the time she had guarded her own heart, the way she had learned to survive and protect herself after losing her husband. She felt a strange kinship with this man, even though they had only met a day ago. As the morning passed into afternoon, the widow found herself opening up more. She shared stories of the ranch, the challenges she had faced keeping it running alone, and the memories she held of her late husband. The rancher listened patiently, never interrupting, offering gentle encouragement rather than advice unless she asked. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. For his part, the rancher also shared pieces of his life. He spoke of the small town where he had grown up, the years he had spent working on ranches, and the responsibilities of raising his daughter alone after his wife had passed. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet acceptance and determination. The widow felt her heart soften with each story. Death to the turncoat! She understood the weight of responsibility, the ache of loss, and the courage it took to keep moving forward. By mid-afternoon, they were joined by the little girl more openly. She approached the widow cautiously, offering a small smile and shyly holding out her hand. The widow knelt down and took it gently, smiling back. Hello there, she said softly. I'm glad to see you today. The child's eyes lit up slightly, and she lingered nearby as the adults continued their work. She helped in small ways, picking up tools or passing them when asked. The widow found herself laughing softly at her little mistakes, enjoying her company more than she expected. For the first time in months, her work didn't feel so lonely, and the quiet of the ranch seemed less oppressive. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon again, the rancher packed up his tools. We should head back soon, he said, glancing at his daughter. She nodded reluctantly but looked over at the widow with a longing expression. The widow waved at her, feeling a pang of sadness that their time together was ending. Will you come back tomorrow? The little girl asked quietly, her voice hesitant but filled with hope. The widow smiled warmly. Of course, she replied. You both are welcome any time. The rancher gave a nod, his eyes holding a mixture of gratitude and something she couldn't quite name. Thank you for letting us help, he said. It means a lot. As they walked away, the widow felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a flutter of something new she had not felt in a long time. For the first time, she imagined the possibility that life on the ranch didn't have to be endured alone, that maybe it could be shared with others who understood the hard work, the quiet moments, and even the small joys that came from companionship. That night, she found herself thinking again of the little girl and the rancher. She replayed the day in her mind, recalling the shy smiles, the shared laughter, and the ease of conversation that had come so naturally. She realized that trust was slowly forming, not forced but gentle and steady. The idea of seeing them again tomorrow filled her with anticipation rather than anxiety. The following days passed in a rhythm that felt almost magical. The widow and the rancher continued to work side by side, completing tasks that had once seemed impossible alone. The little girl became braver with each day, sharing small moments of laughter, helping in tiny ways, and slowly becoming a part of the daily life on the ranch. Through it all, the widow noticed subtle changes in herself. She found herself smiling more, feeling lighter even after a hard day of work. She began to open up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing not just tasks, but memories, hopes, and even fears. And she noticed the rancher doing the same, his quiet strength becoming a source of comfort rather than intimidation. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red and gold, the widow watched the little girl run across the field to her father. They stopped for a moment, laughing together, and she felt a pang in her heart. It was a strange, gentle ache. Not of sadness, but of longing for connection. She realized that she wanted to be part of their lives, not just as a helper, but as someone they could trust and rely on. The rancher noticed her watching, and he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. In that simple gesture, the widow felt a sense of understanding pass between them. They didn't need words for everything. Sometimes the smallest expressions could carry the deepest meaning. That night, she went to bed with a heart lighter than it had been in months. The quiet ranch, once a symbol of loneliness and struggle, now seemed full of possibility. She thought about the future, about the bond forming between her, the rancher, and his daughter. She realized that the small acts of kindness, the shared work, and the simple smiles had begun to weave a connection stronger than she had imagined. As sleep overtook her, she dreamed of the next day, of the laughter of the little girl, the steady presence of the rancher, and the feeling that she was no longer alone. For the first time in a long time, the widow allowed herself to hope, to imagine a life on the ranch that was not only about survival, but about friendship, trust, and the quiet beginnings of something more. The next few days passed in a rhythm that the widow had begun to enjoy. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with soft laughter, shared effort, and the comforting presence of the rancher and his little daughter. Each morning brought the sound of the gate creaking open, the little girl's shy but excited voice, and the steady calm of the rancher as he went about the work. Life had begun to feel lighter, almost like it was returning to her after a long winter of grief and solitude. But life on a ranch, as she had learned long ago, was never entirely predictable. One morning, as the sun barely touched the horizon, the widow stepped outside to begin feeding the animals. The sky had darkened overnight with thick, heavy clouds, and the air was charged with an unusual tension. The wind had picked up, bending the tall grasses, and a sense of unease settled over the land. She shook her head, trying to brush off the feeling, and started her routine. By mid-morning, the storm had grown stronger. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, pounding the roof of the barn and turning the dirt paths into slippery mud. The animals grew restless, some refusing to go into their pens, others making anxious noises that cut through the storm's roar. The widow rushed from one task to another, trying to manage everything herself, but the sheer force of the wind and rain made it nearly impossible. She slipped while trying to herd a cow, narrowly catching herself on the fence, and her heart pounded with frustration and fear. Then, through the blur of rain and wind, she heard the sound of hooves approaching. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but soon the figure of the rancher appeared, leading his daughter behind him. Their coats were soaked, hair plastered to their faces, but they moved with determination. Without a word, the rancher jumped into action, helping the widow secure the animals and repair fences that were starting to give way under the storm. Together, they worked as a team. The widow felt a surge of relief mixed with admiration as she watched him move confidently, giving calm instructions and anticipating problems before they arose. The little girl, though small and vulnerable in the storm, helped in little ways, holding tools, fetching supplies, or simply offering encouragement with her shy smiles. She had grown bolder in recent days, but the storm still made her cling to her father, seeking comfort in his presence. The widow realized as she worked alongside them how much easier everything became when there were more hands, more hearts involved. The storm was harsh and relentless, but it had a strange way of bringing them together, forming a bond through shared effort and mutual reliance. She felt her admiration for the rancher deepen, not just for his skill, but for his quiet patience, his calm leadership, and the love he clearly had for his daughter. By afternoon, the storm began to ease, leaving behind muddy fields and exhausted animals, but a sense of accomplishment lingered. They had managed to secure everything, repair what they could, and keep the animals safe. The widow's heart was still racing, not just from the exertion, but from the realization of how much she had come to rely on these two unexpected visitors. She watched as the rancher tended to his daughter, checking her clothes and brushing mud from her hair, and she felt a pang of longing, a desire for connection, for family, for a life that included someone else's care and warmth. After the storm, as the clouds began to part and the sun peeked through in golden rays, the widow invited them inside to warm up and dry off. The rancher hesitated briefly, but the little girl tugged at his hand, her eyes shining with excitement. Inside the small kitchen, they removed their wet coats and settled by the fire. The warmth seeped into their bones, and the widow noticed how naturally the little girl had already begun to feel at home, moving quietly through the space, her curiosity piqued by the objects and smells of the kitchen. Over cups of steaming tea, conversation flowed more easily than it ever had before. The rancher spoke softly, recounting small memories of his own childhood, little lessons he had learned from his father, and how he had taught his daughter to be strong and careful in the world. The widow shared stories too, laughing quietly at the memories of her husband and the early days of their ranching life. There was a mutual understanding between them now, a sense that words were not always necessary to convey respect, trust, and growing affection. The little girl, feeling safe and seen, began to share more about herself. She spoke of small adventures on their ranch, the animals she loved most, and the games she played when no one was watching. The widow listened with a warm smile, enjoying these glimpses into a child's mind, and realized how much joy these simple moments could bring. She began to see the potential for a family connection that went beyond mere friendship or help. It was forming quietly, gently, but undeniably. Later in the evening, the widow helped the little girl bathe, laughing softly at her shy attempts to help herself. The rancher watched, a quiet pride and tenderness in his eyes, and the widow felt a deep admiration for him that went beyond friendship. He was patient, caring, and strong, yet never overbearing. His love for his daughter was clear in every gesture, every careful word, every watchful glance. She found herself hoping that one day that same kindness and care could extend to her as well. As the night wore on, the storm had passed entirely. Outside, the ranch lay wet and glistening, the moon casting silver light over the fields. The widow stepped outside for a moment, taking in the quiet aftermath of the storm. She thought about how life had brought these two strangers into her world, and how quickly they had become indispensable. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she was not just surviving, she was living, sharing her life and her space with others, learning to trust, to care, and to hope again. Before leaving for the night, the rancher knelt by his daughter, whispering something she giggled at, and the widow's heart swelled at the scene. The little girl then turned to her and offered a shy smile. "I like it here," she said softly. The widow nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I'm glad," she replied gently. "You're always welcome." When they finally departed, the widow stood at the door, watching them ride away under the moonlight. The fields, soaked and shining, reflected the sense of renewal she felt inside. She knew there would be challenges ahead, storms would come again, and life on the ranch would never be easy. But she also knew that with these two in her life, even the hardest times could be met with courage, teamwork, and compassion. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the events of the day. The storm had been frightening, exhausting, and challenging, yet it had revealed something important: the value of trust, the strength of connection, and the quiet power of shared responsibility. She realized that her feelings for the rancher were growing, not just as gratitude for his help, but as admiration for the man he was, the father he had become, and the kindness he carried in his heart. She also thought about the little girl, her curiosity, her gentle courage, and the way she had begun to accept the widow into her small world. A bond was forming, small and fragile, but strong enough to withstand hesitation, fear, and even the occasional storm. It was a bond that could grow into something enduring, a family built not by chance alone, but by choice, trust, and care. In the days that followed, life on the ranch settled into a rhythm once more, but one that felt richer, fuller, and more meaningful than before. The widow, the rancher, and his daughter continued to work together, laugh together, and share moments of quiet tenderness that spoke louder than words. The storm had passed, but its memory remained as a reminder of how challenges could reveal strength, deepen connections, and bring unexpected joy. And as the moon rose each night, casting its silver glow over the fields, the widow finally allowed herself to imagine a future she had not dared to consider before. A future where she was not alone, where she was part of a small, caring family. And where the loneliness of the past could be replaced by the warmth of trust, companionship, and hope. For the first time in many months, she felt a deep, steady sense of peace, and she knew that tomorrow, when they returned, the bond between them would grow even stronger, shaping a life that none of them had expected but all of them quietly desired. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the sun spilling over the fields in warm, golden light. The ranch seemed almost alive, glistening from the storms of the past few days, and the widow felt a quiet joy in stepping outside. She had grown accustomed to the presence of the rancher and his little daughter, but she was beginning to realize that she no longer thought of them as mere visitors. They were becoming part of her daily life, part of her world. The familiar creak of the gate announced their arrival. The little girl bounded ahead, her small boots kicking up soft clouds of dust, and the widow's heart lifted at the sight. The rancher followed more slowly, his calm, steady presence grounding the chaos of energy around him. They greeted each other warmly, as if the unspoken bond between them had grown stronger over the last few days. Together they moved through the ranch with a sense of purpose. Tasks that once seemed daunting were now manageable thanks to their combined effort. The widow noticed how naturally the little girl had begun to participate. She fed the chickens carefully, helped collect eggs, and even offered small suggestions about repairing fences, all while laughing and chattering in her shy, sweet way. The widow smiled quietly, touched by the child's confidence and courage. She realized that the little girl was no longer shy or fearful around her. She was comfortable, trusting, and even eager to share her world. The rancher worked beside her, guiding his daughter with patience and care, yet never diminishing her sense of independence. She could see the pride in his eyes, the love he carried for this small, spirited child. And in that same gaze, she glimpsed something that made her heart beat faster, a recognition of her own presence in their lives, a quiet acknowledgement that she had become important, not just as a helper, but as someone they could rely on, someone they trusted. As the day progressed, the widow felt a growing warmth in her chest. She realized that her life, which had been defined by loss and solitude, was beginning to transform. The rancher's presence had brought more than just skill and assistance. He had brought companionship, laughter, and a sense of shared purpose. And the little girl, with her quiet curiosity and gentle spirit, had begun to fill a space in her heart she hadn't realized was empty. During a break in their work, they gathered by the small porch of the ranch house. The widow poured tea into 3 mugs, handing them out carefully. The little girl accepted hers with a shy smile, her fingers curling around the warm cup. The rancher sat across from her, watching her with a soft expression. "Thank you," he said quietly, addressing the widow, "for letting us be here, for trusting me, and for making this place feel like home again." The widow felt a lump in her throat. Words had never come easily to her when it came to expressing deep emotions, but she nodded, letting her eyes convey what she could not speak.
"You've made it easier," she said softly. "Not just the work, but the feeling of not being alone." The rancher's eyes softened, and for a moment no words were needed.
The little girl, sensing the quiet connection between them, leaned closer to her father and then glanced up at the widow with a small, happy smile. It was as if she understood something that neither adult needed to say aloud. The beginnings of a family, built not on accident, but on choice, trust, and care. They repaired the barn roof together, worked in the fields, and tended to the animals. Laughter rang out occasionally, lightening the mood and filling the ranch with warmth that had been absent for far too long. The widow realized that even the smallest moments, the passing of a tool, the sharing of a story, a laugh over a spilled bucket of feed, were creating memories that would last a lifetime. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, the widow watched the rancher and his daughter walking toward the barn. The little girl skipped ahead, her laughter echoing in the warm evening air. The rancher glanced over his shoulder at the widow, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She felt a wave of contentment and gratitude. This was the life she had always worked hard for, but never truly imagined she could have again. That evening, after the animals were fed and the barn was secured, they gathered in the small kitchen for dinner. The little girl chatted happily about her day, the tasks she had accomplished, and the moments she had enjoyed most. The widow listened, smiling and offering gentle encouragement, while the rancher shared small stories from his own childhood, lessons he had learned, and the hopes he carried for his daughter. It was a simple scene, yet it was filled with love, warmth, and connection. After dinner, as the stars began to appear in the clear night sky, the widow stepped outside for a moment. The air was cool and fresh, and the ranch seemed peaceful, almost magical in the soft moonlight. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the storms, the hard work, the shared laughter, and the quiet moments of understanding. She realized that life had a way of surprising even the loneliest hearts, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the presence of the rancher and his daughter. The rancher came to stand beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "It's a good night," he said quietly, his voice low but warm. "Yes," she replied, glancing at him. "It feels right. Peaceful. Like this is how it's supposed to be." He nodded, and for a moment they simply stood there looking out over the fields. There was no need for words. The connection between them had grown strong enough to exist in silence. The little girl appeared behind him, wrapping her small arms around his leg and then peeking up at the widow. She smiled, a small gesture of trust and affection that melted any remaining distance between them. That night, as they settled into their separate rooms for sleep, the widow felt a profound sense of belonging. She thought about the ranch, the animals, and the life she had fought to maintain alone, and realized that it had become something more than survival. It had become a place of home, warmth, and family. She allowed herself to imagine a future where the three of them, herself, the rancher, and his little daughter, could face life's challenges together, share in its joys, and build memories that would last for years to come. The next morning, the widow woke with a sense of excitement and purpose. The rancher and his daughter had already begun their work outside, and she felt a renewed energy as she joined them. The routine that had once been exhausting and lonely was now filled with laughter, shared effort, and a quiet joy. The little girl ran ahead, helping with small tasks and chatting about her plans for the day, while the rancher guided her with gentle patience. As the day progressed, the widow noticed the subtle ways in which their lives had intertwined. The rancher relied on her advice and assistance. The little girl sought her attention and comfort, and she, in turn, felt a growing sense of responsibility and care for both of them. Life on the ranch had transformed from a solitary struggle into a shared adventure, where every challenge was met with teamwork and every success was celebrated together. By evening, the sun was low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the fields. They gathered on the porch, enjoying a quiet moment of reflection. The little girl nestled between the adults, and the widow felt a deep sense of peace. She realized that she had found something she had long thought impossible, a family that was not born of circumstance, but of choice, love, and trust. The rancher looked at her and spoke quietly. "I don't know how to thank you for letting us be a part of this, of your life." She smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. "No thanks are needed," she replied. "We've all found something here. A place, a purpose, and each other." As the stars appeared overhead, the widow felt a profound sense of completion. The ranch, once a place of loneliness and hardship, had become a home filled with laughter, care, and hope. She knew that challenges would still come, the weather, the animals, and life itself. But she also knew that with the rancher and his daughter by her side, she would never face them alone again. The little girl yawned and nestled closer to them, her small hands entwined with theirs. The widow and the rancher shared a look of quiet understanding. Their lives had been changed in the simplest yet most profound ways, through trust, kindness, and the willingness to open their hearts. And as the night settled over the ranch, with the soft glow of the moon casting silver light across the fields, the widow finally allowed herself to fully believe in the future she had once thought impossible. She had found companionship, she had found trust, and she had found a family in the most unexpected way. Life, she realized, was not only to be endured, it was to be shared, cherished, and loved. For the first time in years, she went to sleep with a full heart, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of laughter, work, and quiet joy, a life not lived in solitude, but in the warmth of family, love, and hope. And as the ranch rested under the stars, the widow, the rancher, and his little daughter slept peacefully, ready to face whatever challenges and joys the future might hold together.